Okay, I don't know what happened there. So YouTube, being friended as it is to me, cut me off in the middle of my sentence, which was absolutely lovely. And it said I could return to my stream to continue, but it wouldn't let me. So this is the continuation of what I was talking about earlier in the stream about reform, revolution, and counter-revolution. And I apologize for the inconvenience that this is happening this way. This is what it's like trying to go ahead and speak these days. Technology is your enemy, and it doesn't let certain ideas get out there. But so we come up to 2020, and as I was explaining to you, the problem that we run into is that everyone's fighting over a one size fits all solution because we can't get around the idea that would do anything differently because we accept the system and the structure, maybe because the institutional cost of changing it is too high, but it is a one size fits all solution that was crafted. Actually, I shouldn't say crafted, that was grafted onto the American model. And as you would know if you understood American history better, that America only worked specifically because it was never a one size fits all solution. That's how New England and Dixie were originally able to combine and to create the nascent nation. That was how you were able to settle the West, recognizing that what worked in Wyoming was never going to be what worked in Vermont. And yet you were able to have that succeed because you had those sorts of ideas. And we had a governmental structure that was deliberately and intentionally slight because we recognized that if we did anything other than that, this wouldn't work. Now, it gets interesting. If you think of America as the settlement of a frontier by a Western civilization, you can see that that worked for quite a while to put together a sort of structure to get across the U.S., and now we've done so. I would say the North and the South are deeply settled, and the West is settled to some extent. You have large cities, but there's a lot of land there that could still be settled. Okay, so that's where we are as of today. Now let's talk about from a political perspective for just one moment. So I talked about reform, revolution, and counter-revolution. Reform was the idea that we were going to fix this. The left tried different things. They tried Occupy Wall Street. They tried Obama. They tried everything. That didn't work. The right tried this. They tried the Tea Party. They tried, the Ron Paul Revolution actually was a lot like that, even though it's a bit libertarian and leaned right. The Constitutional Revolution, the Trump train, all of that stuff. None of that worked, and they blamed each other. But the truth is, neither side could ever succeed. And the far left realized that, and they went out there, and that's where Antifa came from. And the far right realized it, and that's where the alt right came from, although that got destroyed by the state because the state liked globalism better than nationalism, and it understood the appeal of the far left, although it was able to be numerically larger, was never going to be as large of a threat because it would be contained to a model that could be managed very easily. Because, frankly, nobody likes a group that goes around there fighting for fictions like they do, like this idea that ultimate relativism is out there. Nonetheless, they have become a force in spite of the fact they're disconnected from reality. And what's interesting is that the far left, in a lot of ways, evolved not as a political movement, but as a religion and a belief that ultimately individuals are free from the strictures of nature. And it's sort of an interesting thing that technology enables the first postmodern religion. And that's what the woke theocracy really is. And it's a bigger threat to the state than it realizes, but the state largely agrees with its goals in that outcome, and they very, very well enable it. That is where we sit at this point in time. But from the political perspective, which is the point of this, what it means is that people are not going to have autonomy into the future. And I want to talk about the problem that the right has specifically, because that's where my thought was when I started this story. The right is stuck defending a system that works against its interest, that does not acknowledge the same rules for its adherents versus those who oppose it, and that ultimately is incapable of solving the problem it faces. We have a lot of people who want to reform people. They want to reform humanity, right? They want to reform, say, can't we go back to the old ways? No, we cannot. Technology has changed things, education has changed things, the way people have acted and all these events have changed things. If people were just different, the system would work fine. The system did work fine for an agrarian, thinly populated country like the United States was, but it doesn't work for that. Republics with limited government do not work when people are of low efficacy and high density. It never works, and that's why Rome became an empire. That's why Greece became an empire. That's why America became an empire, but we still fight under these terms of ideology that don't recognize the fundamental truths of who we are beneath these things. And the fact that this blind spot continues, and that some people who are otherwise very, very much smart and who are very pragmatic about recognizing all the problems that exist, at the same time go out there and idealistically defend notions that literally do not solve the problems and that were responsible for the creation of the very issues that are put us in this position right now, are missing the point. So what happens? They say, let's go back to the old way. And they blame COVID and they blame the economic shutdown. They say, if you just open up the economy, these revolutions are not happening because COVID shut down the economy. This revolution is happening because people think the economy we have sucks. They think that, and they're right, by the way, that they look at it and they see that, ultimately a very small amount of the people control a mass amount of the wealth, that social mobility is fundamentally decreasing, the choice in the way of really being able to influence the way the human world works, not just the world of technology where we're talking into screens, is disappearing. And they say, okay, well, we don't want to be a part of that. It's not good. It's not right. And what you see is people at the top funding people at the bottom to attack those in the middle. And this happens over and over again. So you see your hyper neoliberal elites, your Jeff Bezos types, own something like Amazon and the Washington Post, signals like crazy to the people at the bottom, hey, attack those people. And the small entrepreneurs and the people who are in the upper middle class, upwardly mobile, a lot of times blue collar people who are working their way upward, not the sort of comfy landed gentry, lower white middle class, the Junkers of the old Prussian style. They will go out there and they'll say, okay, well, our kids are well educated and they have a slot in life and they'll be the professional bureaucrat class. They go to college, they get a degree, they're in debt, but they like it. They read the New York Times, sip soy lattes, and go about their days. But that class, okay, has kind of been, they'll go along with the system. They're just comfy and they've been well trained and educated to enjoy a certain level of life. But for the people who are upwardly mobile, who defend the American system of capitalism and free markets, you don't have it. It doesn't really exist. It hasn't existed for at least 50 years. And instead, you're fighting for a system that really is neo-corporate control where you have monopolies. But you're fighting it because you believe your own bullshit. You've been watching things that are out there on the media saying how great America is and how great the economy is and how fair it was. It was never fair. It hasn't been fair in a very long time. And I'm not saying this from the perspective of everyone should get something for free. I'm saying that the rule's against you. You have a huge corporation. You get bailouts. You get help from the Fed. You get free money from government contracts you can compete for. You're small business. You don't get in on that pork barrel spending. Instead, you get to huff it out to make a buck, always paying more in taxes, more in administrative fees, getting hit with if you have a brick and mortar, all these expenses. But you think because you're able to work your way up a little bit, you're doing well. The system wasn't fair to you either. And you'll be like, oh, that's just sour grapes. Well, here's what happens. If you reach a point in a society where 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, whatever the percentage of people are not happy with the way the system's working, even if it works for you, that system will not hold. And that's where we're at. That's why we're at the point of revolution. We could have shut down for COVID. We didn't because no one was invested in one another and our system was rampantly individualistic. We've kept going as COVID became bigger, and whether it's a scam or whether it's a big problem in the end, ultimately that's less important than what it revealed about how we actually look at things, which was even when we had the opportunity to go back, a lot of people don't want to. And why would you? It wasn't a system that was working well. And this is the nature of it. 250 years in, Americans are starting to realize that we have a system that got subverted from its original intent and that ultimately only does things nominal, or I should say, its nominal purposes don't recognize or realize their actual practical outcomes. That we live in a country that serves a global interest for better or worse, whether you think that's a good or a bad thing, and that the structure of our governance and everything about us is not structured right to either accomplish or thwart those ends. And so, two options emerge. There will be people who go out there with pathological nostalgia and say, we must restore the republic, we must do these things. We are not a Republican country anymore. We are not a thinly settled land where we have self-sufficient farm owners. Would that we were. I'd be a happier guy. But you're not going to spend the next 20 years forcing people to go back to the farms. I mean, could you imagine trying to do that? But that's what it would take to make America back into the country that people would want again. And a few people like that, and they give homage to that because it costs very little to do rhetoric and a whole lot to do change. So the revolution is on. The woke theocracy, the religion of the left, against the neoliberal state. And on one hand, they're allies to one another. That's true. On the other hand, they both understand the threats of one another. Eventually, what will happen is the neoliberal state will purge the woke theocracy. And just look what happens if you're a Black Lives Matter supporter who starts to question who owns the media. You've seen some of those rappers like Grandmaster Jay and some of these people get taken down just for going ahead and saying, wait a minute, we see who the law really is. That's one part of it. But the other part of it is if the woke theocracy ever gets control of the cities, don't think that they're not eventually going to purge the rich. They understand what they've done before, and they're looking for an opportunity to take charge as well. Now, in the end, will a couple people survive by being accommodators? Of course they will, and that's the nature of a revolution. But the point I'm trying to share to you is we're not going back to the way it was. That will not be permitted, and nobody wants that. Not even you, even if you're someone who thinks, well, I'm someone who wants America to be the way it used to be. Well, if you want an America worth defending, you are now at point 3 in the equation, which is the counter-revolution. Welcome to the Atlantic nation. That's what we're doing. We are looking at the reality that the old system is collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions, that there are two hostile forces, an angry far left of woke theocracy, a neoliberal cynical elite of old-style global marketers in control, and against that, there's no one who's speaking for human liberation. There's no one who's speaking for the sovereignty of the spirit. There's no one who speaks of having value that exists that is transcendent, or the idea that liberty should play a choice in this. Neither of those sides believes in liberty at all. Good morning, Red. Glad to see you. So when you look at this question of what a counter-revolution looks like, it's no accident that the Atlantic nation that yours truly, your historian friend, is forming here, goes ahead and tries to fit into that gap where we go ahead and we affirm a uniquely human future based not on systems or technology, but based on ideas and interactions. That we want to move away from this idea that the screens like the one you're staring at right now are the way to the future, and instead look for organic connections within regions and between peoples. And as nationalists, which I think most of us are, and I certainly am, we recognize there is not a one-size-fits-all solution. We don't all see you as a market to be going ahead and sell goods to. That's what happens with the neoliberals, whether they be at Facebook or whether they be in Bethesda selling arms around the world, right? It's not the way it would work in the woke theocracy, where you are being set up as the product to go ahead and serve the machine, where you're going to have to believe what everyone else believes. It's the idea that you can have choice to believe. You can be part of the nature. We are the green faction in this. It's weird that it worked out that way. You would never think the traditionalists and nationalists, but why not? Stewardship of nature is a Christian value, right? And as we go through this and we look at the counter-revolution, what we are is, if we have one side, it's the force of money and state, and that's the neoliberals. And if we have one side, which is ultimately going to end up the force of technology and compliance, and that's the far left, then consider us, we are the side of nature and sovereignty. The idea that we are stewards of the land, that we are here for but a season to help people. We believe in the continuity of life. We believe in families. We believe in faith. And we believe that we have an honor and an obligation to our land. And it's a different way of looking at things, but it solves the problems. The old republic had some very good ideas. We love the Bill of Rights. We carried it forward. We like the idea people should have a say in things. Absolutely. And patriotism for the land, I believe in that. But not patriotism that can be exploited into fighting others. But instead, we just fight to defend our homes, which is what America was for the first 150 years. And that we will resettle our homes. Our slogan here is settle for better, and that's what the Atlantic nation tries to do. But I want to talk about that a little more in depth, because you need to know some of the American history. I've given you sort of the broad ideological stroke of what we're talking about here. Excuse me, but I'm going to add in a little bit of detail on it. So, America was an empire that stunted 3 nations, okay? And I'm saying this just in the United States context. We'll leave Canada aside right now. Canada has its own unique and interesting history, but for the purposes of conversation, it'll make it easier if I don't include them right now, although they're very much caught up in our history and we in theirs, even though we don't realize it. So the United States essentially was a combination of 2 different nations, right? It was a combination of New England in the north and Dixie in the south, and they were 2 very different nations. New England was formed as a nation basically predicated on the idea that you want to have the right social order in order to realize the optimal public good in service to the Lord. And that's how they actually looked at it. But the idea, even as the Lord got extracted from it, progressivism, which emerged as a New England sort of transcendental philosophy, still had the right social order based upon the idea of what the absolute good is. Whereas the South was settled overwhelmingly by people who basically believed in an elite aristocracy that would be responsible for better controlling and running the way the land worked. And as it worked out, things do change over time. The Deep South, which was settled in by people who came later, just went ahead and they kind of removed some of the hierarchical structures, but they came in there as frontiersmen. Think of your Daniel Boone type people into places like Kentucky, Tennessee, points westward, and they developed a unique frontier culture. They had some of the social ethics, the sort of Christian, gentlemanly nature of the South, but they ultimately were going forward with a rougher edge. On the same token, the Midwest, which was settled by New England largely, like Connecticut into Ohio, ended up going ahead and being a combination of the idea of social order and structured planning, but with a form of Teutonic efficiency as later German and additionally some Irish immigrants and other places from Europe came in there. So the North ended up being the force of order, the South ended up being the force of chivalry, and the West ended up being the frontier. And those are kind of the three different models that would eventually emerge in North America today. And it's still that case, where the North, in theory, except for the sort of madness that takes over cities, is an orderly place. You can see lines are set out in straight lines, that things are kept in a very clean sort of way. It's a tidy society where there's a belief to this day that people are perfectible, that good order and good rules make sense. You go down south and they believe more in liberty and freedom. They always have. That's why Patrick Henry was fighting Sam Adams many, many years ago, because they had the idea that you wanted to have greater liberation and that you didn't want anyone telling you what to do. And so they went through life that way, and they have all good to see you, Joseph. Hope all's well down there in the bluegrass state. That ultimately you had these sort of things. Oh, I know it is beautiful here in Maine, isn't it? A wonderful state. Very blessed to be here. And so, but to get back to what I was saying, so the South had a very different idea of things, of how they were going to do it. So the North and the South managed to trundle on, with some problems, and eventually they realized they were two separate nations fighting one another. And the thing came to a head over a lot of different issues. It came to an issue over economy. It came to a head over slavery. I don't want to relitigate the Civil War, other than to say that the decision was essentially promoted by New England to the rest of the North to go ahead and fight the South to put their ideas of social order on the South, because they thought the South was incapable or would not do it, or they ultimately just said, that does not work for us. We are going to compel you to act. And it's a very Teutonic way of thinking of the world, actually. The Germans tend to do it, and it's kind of interesting. What New England wouldn't have done in 1814, where we actually thought about trying to break away because of the War of 1812, because if you'll know, during that war, the Canadians will know, the New England militias chose not to fight the Canadians, and it was the South and the West who came up to fight, and not surprising, absent the Yankees, the South lost yet another war. Just kidding, just having fun with y'all. But ultimately, that was really the truth of it, that the South and the West had sort of a divergent position from the North and the Midwest. And eventually that comes to a head in the Civil War. So the Civil War represents a critical break, where the northeastern nation was allowed to continue and trundled along on its way to empire, but the southern nation was stunted, right? And it is my belief, and I will say this, that had the North not invaded the South, that the South would have ended slavery within 20 years, and they probably would have come to some sort of an accommodation that would have looked a bit more like Latin America, but eventually would have been a southern Christian nation that would have had its own unique sort of tendencies, that would have been perhaps like Spain was, or like Italy was. And it is a different area. It's a different environment, a different climate, but more importantly, it's a different culture. Nonetheless, because of the trauma of both the war, the loss of life there, the Reconstruction, and the fact that the South was set back 100 years, it was not allowed to develop organically. And even to this day, when you look at some of the Southern developments, you have the weird imposition of sort of new organic cultures, like the dirty South culture that, you see blacks have, or that you see the Yankee transplants that dot every, coastal community, including the very bizarre state that is Florida. But the South was never allowed to be the South. And because it was not allowed to be the South, it did not form properly. So there's one nation that got suppressed in the United States, and there's meta nations within it: the Tidewater, the Deep South, and Texas. Texas is its own story, and where they fit between South and West is complicated. In the time of the Confederacy, they fit in the South. Perhaps now they fit in the West. Texans themselves tell me as much. The West is another story. Now, the West could have been settled because California, as you recall, was part of the Union. But interestingly, a lot of Confederates went up to the Mountain West, to Denver, and to the Northwest, as well as to California, but less so. But interestingly, California ended up being the weird offshoot of the Northeast, where ultimately, though, they got lost in the fact that they basically got overrun and got caught up in sort of a weird hybridization of Latino and progressive Northeastern culture. In the Northwest, however, you had a weirder situation where you had had the frontier ethics of the South brought to the Northwest. So you ended up with a situation where you had a society that was designed for an environment of one kind, that actually of a sort of swampy, hot weather, sort of different environment, and it went and had a weird transition into the Northwest. What that ended up equaling, it's hard for me to say because I'm not a Northwesterner. But I will say this: the West could have organically developed into a really interesting place if small towns were allowed to proliferate. But because we had reached the point in technology and industry that wasn't common, and perhaps even more importantly, because the federal government shunted it by not allowing the Homestead Act to continue, we literally never got to see what the Northwest could be because it was not organically settled. It was force settled as part of the imperial model that was set up by the Northeast, by the heart of empire, and whether that be New York or Chicago, or the little outposts they put out west in California, or San Francisco, Los Angeles, for these different areas. You never really had a chance to have an organic Northwest develop. Not that there aren't little towns that are beautiful to visit. I had a chance to visit some in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, and I mention this because I've been talking to a lot of people in the Northwest lately. It's interesting. I have people in the Mountain West in the Northwest say, help us against the coast, and I have people on the coast who say, help us reorganize, not knowing that the inland hates them with an abiding passion. But all of this happened because you don't have a fabric. You have outposts, and you have outposts because you're part of an empire. Boise is an outpost that ultimately, I'll get to your questions at the end, but I have a coherent presentation today, so we're going to go through it. So the empire that was set up in different towns. And if you look out west, this is what gets them into a lot of trouble. Like 80 to 90% of their population are all caught up in cities and in near suburbs to the cities, or commuter suburbs. But you don't have organic small towns. You don't have little towns that exist. And it's not because the people wouldn't want to. Believe me, the Willamette Valley would be perfect for it, as would the Columbia River in certain places. But you were never allowed the capacity to do so. So your development was never organically permitted. And why am I going through this whole thing? Because I talk to you, when I talk about the Atlantic nation, about organic developments of how you put together a nation that is conceived in meeting the needs of their people. And I've talked to a lot of people about where the lines go. And I generally draw the lines for where we go down to about the 36th parallel, or if you want to think of it, the Kentucky-Tennessee border, and a little bit west of the Missouri River, where the last of the Scandinavian kind of free settlements were, and into the sort of rocky ranches and plains that end up being in Montana, Wyoming, and points westward. And I understand that that's the line where this different model applies, and that people were not able to go ahead and develop it that way. But I say that because I've been trying to help people in the West, especially, and a little bit in the South, but Yankees don't tell Southerners what to do. It never goes well. But I've been trying to help the people out West have an understanding that you guys never had a chance to have your own organic nation. And to the Southerners, you didn't get a chance to either. So as we go and look at this, the one thing that's unique about this Atlantic nation model is, if you live in other regions, this is actually really worth supporting, because the idea is we are trying to focus on ourselves instead of focusing on you. Instead of trying to be the empire of North America in a lot of ways, we have to recognize that there's organic developments that are happening in areas, and that those need to be put together. And then, the same thing actually applies somewhat in the Canadian example. Leave aside the Quebec-Ontario rivalry, the rush to get to the coast to imperially settle those areas, the extraction areas of Alberta and Saskatchewan, as much as they might like it and think of themselves like a second Texas, or the colony like San Francisco that was set up in Vancouver. The model actually holds pretty good true over there, in the same sort of way that it was mercantile interest of the Eastern establishment, which in this case could go as far east as London, that were responsible for developing the Commonwealth and the Dominion in that way, were basically trying to control it. And so one of the things that we are trying to push for, as we push for decentralization, we realize that one of the things that changed us in the Atlantic and made us less good than we could have been is that we went ahead and we were out there going ahead and trying to be the imperialists who were running not just the world, but our own country in a lot of ways. And that doesn't necessarily make sense for us in a new model. But you have to think of a new model, and you have to be willing to say, hey, look, the republic where we fight over the Senate and we fight over ideology goes away. We'll have to think very differently in this. And that's one of the things I want to encourage people to think about, what decentralization looks like. And for the people who live out west specifically, I think it's so important that when you begin thinking of what your solutions are going to be, that you begin breaking up your cities into the individual neighborhoods. that you get past the idea that you owe some guilt to some ideology. You need to trash that right now and begin building small towns and resettling your own land. The opportunity for Oregon and Washington and British Columbia and potentially to link yourselves up organically with the states of Idaho or the province of Alberta is to begin building those small towns. Start building some things that are more effective, and building structure that helps to build a bridge between Seattle or SeaTac all the way to Tacoma, to Coeur d'Alene, to Missoula. And one other thing we all have to do is recognize where our enemies sit, okay? So if you want to have a beautiful future where you actually have a free nation, you have to call out your enemies. So who are your enemies? If you look at it the way the world, I look at the world, as a counter-revolutionary who are going out there, you could say we're reactionary, but we're really not. We're actually quite visionary. What we're trying to do is you look at the center of empire as the heart of it, the neoliberal establishment, right? The Federal Reserve banks, the DC power elites, the corporate power structure that makes its money off of free funding from the Federal Reserve Bank, which we've seen in this crisis. And it also does so off international contracts, destroying and hollowing out little communities. The enemy of the mom and pop shop is not the protester in the street. It's the neoliberal corporation that's going to cut you out by going in there, underpricing you, selling directly, getting tax benefits, and doing that. And that's one force you have to fight. Now, the other force in terms of the radical left is you're going to have to fight the universities. The colleges have become nothing more than indoctrination camps, and removing them from our presence will have to be some of the battle. Not because education doesn't matter, but because this cynical motive that teaches people towards self-hatred, makes money off people where they're in debt for 20 years, where they basically serve in a form of serfdom, is the modern day form of indentured servitude towards psychologically induced self-hatred. And when you look at all these college towns, every time you look at a problem area, there's always a college town. And we're going to have to do something about that. The way the New Albion plan thought about the problem is we're going to allow absolute school choice and non-funding of these educational things. So education will no longer be an industry, it will be an opportunity. And there's other ways you could look at it, but fundamentally, you're going to have to do something about this. And it's not about restricting the freedom of speech, it's about not subjecting your own children to a form of psychological torture and then being stupid enough to pay for it. These are the battles we're going to have if we want to have a reclamation, and that's what the counter-revolution is going to look like. And so what are our structures? I'll tell you what it is. A revitalized church is going to have to be part of it, because you're going to need a moral value, and you see that this is coming out. I don't know how many of you follow church politics. I follow them quite closely, and there are churches in California now. The one, Grace Community Church with John MacArthur out there in California, who Gavin Newsom is basically threatening to destroy and to jail the pastors for trying to offer services. And if you think the Christian community isn't watching that, that's one part of it. For those who come from the white working class especially, and throughout the working class, who want to have value as artisans, a reformed and revitalized union guild structure as part of the game, where we want to recognize that you who have real talent, who build things, you're the artisans that are going to be at the core of our structure. For white people generally who've been attacked, and for families and heterosexuals, and yeah, I'm going to bring that word back, let's make marriage good again, we ultimately are part of this as well, because the idea that you should have a family be the heart of society is something no one talks about. Ultimately, the neoliberals just want to sell to you, and the far left revolutionaries just want to go ahead and control you. I want you to be able to have organic relationships again, and that's part of what the struggle for the Atlantic nation is, for men and women to be together and to have a society that's not oriented just around work and time and efficiency, but that's oriented around family and balance and structure, and a structure that allows you to do what I do, where I come out here and I share with you this beautiful nature that you get to see me recording from in Maine. If it looks like bliss, it's because I have restructured my life at high cost, I'd tell you, to go ahead and meet these needs. But that's what you need to be able to do as well, because we are dealing with the dictatorships of time and money and to control. And if you want to have the ability to be a free-thinking human individual with conscience who could actually consider questions and have any sort of moral evolution or satisfaction of life, if you want to have the good, happy moments, then we have to change a lot of things. And the good news, if there is any, is that the revolution is succeeding and it's going to break this system. I have no doubt of that. The question is, will we have a counter alternative to put together, and what cost are we willing to pay to enact it? Because ultimately, that's what we will have to do. And I understand that's a hard question, and I will have a lot more to say on that that as the thing evolves. Right now is not the time to have that conversation. Now is the time to understand why that conversation is necessary, and also to begin thinking about what it is you're fighting for. Are you fighting for a system where you're going to force equality on others? Are you fighting on a system to defend the dollar? Or are you fighting for your faith, your families, and your fatherland? Are you fighting for the idea that where you live has meaning to you? Do you love your state? Do you love your town? Do you love your community? And if you don't, why not? What would make it a place you could love? What would give your life meaning? What would be good? What would be right? Why don't we ask these questions? Because we do what we have to do. If what we have to do is what makes us unhappy, why is it what we have to do? Because someone said so, because you owe them money, because you owe them debt, because you owe them an obligation. Now is the time to tear down statues, and it might not be an easy time, but now that we're here, let's at least make it worthwhile. That's what a counter-revolution is all about. And hopefully giving you a little bit of background. I did this piece specifically for some of my friends in different areas so that you can go ahead and rediscover what you're about. If you're in Dixie, what does that look like? Are you multiple countries? Are you one country? Can you reconcile the white-black split? Will you reclaim your Christian past and come together, or will you split into two ethno-states that are doomed to fight one another? Those are your choices. Out west, here's your issues. You have the coast fighting against the highlands. The highlands want to be left alone. They want to have freedom. They want to have small towns. Do you out there on the coast want to try to have dominion against them and force them to fight you? Or do you want to go ahead and break up and allow people? You say you want to have all these different opportunities at justice. Would you allow your own people a chance to have that and go ahead and decentralize a little bit? Or are you just going to go ahead and continue destroying things? I will say the most dangerous people in the U.S. today are on the West Coast, because there are people who are hurt, who have no understanding of what they do. There are forces of discord that I genuinely, unironically believe are moved by demoniacal spirit. You know, that literally they have this idea that by destroying things, they're going to build something. They don't know what they want to build. They say they want justice, but what justice do they have? The equality of ashes? Do you want to be kings over the rubble of your own cities? Because if you do, you will be put down like dogs, like rabid beasts, because that's what you're acting like. And I say this with much love and consideration for the many people who are just watching this and feel helpless, because your elites are allowing it. But why are your elites allowing it? That's the question no one asks. And that's because what we are seeing now is a cynical game between a far left that wants to destroy everything to try to build a utopia, and utopias often end up as their own hell, and an elite that knows they're doing this on purpose because they want you to give power over them to remake this society as the technological serfdom they want, just as the price for stopping them. And neither choice is a good choice. You see how you're given a false choice? I always tell you, when you're given two choices you don't like, seek a third one. Atlantic nationalism is that. But let me go ahead and make a suggestion. And I think this is the right answer, but we'll talk about it. It's a conversation, it's not an answer. That there should be three forms of nationalism that develop in the United States. There should be Atlantic nationalism, and that's the Northeast. If you want to draw a line in your head, draw from Kansas, north and east, that's us. That you want to have Dixie nationalism. The South needs to remember who it is, and you shouldn't have to have a Yankee tell you. We're not looking to fight you this time. We're looking for you to find yourself, and we need friends who will fight against DC. That's going to be you guys. You have to figure out and remember the good parts of your history, the honor, the bravery, the valor, and also the faith that united your people. If you're going to have any chance at all not to descend into a total race war, and you may do that, actually. I think the odds are pretty high that happens down there, because I know how people look at things. But yet I've been to places in rural Tennessee and rural Alabama and whatnot, where those issues, people have lived side by side, perhaps separately, but they've lived that way for many years. Can you work those things out, and can you find a way to go ahead and coexist? You did so for many years, and it's only in applying a sort of northern and frankly European ideology you got in trouble. Okay, for my friends out west, you are the Pacific state. Figure it out. We'll see where the line is along the Rockies, and it may be that we in the north, and in the north and the south may encroach right to the line of that, but you have your own civilization as well. You know, Aaron Burr, before he got into a lot of trouble, actually was talking about the idea that Jefferson had said, because he was his vice president, and his idea was, good morning, Craig. His idea was that you had a separate state of Columbia on the west coast, that it was called that. You know, this was before, actually this came out before the time that Boulevard started doing everything with Grand Columbia. But the idea that there was a uniquely Western society, and it is unique in the West. Look, I grew up in Phoenix. I understand that. I spent a lot of time in California, and I was most recently in the Northwest. That you guys have a more laid-back culture. You could do something that would be uniquely with Asian influences that would maybe recognize itself as like an America equivalent to Japan, but you're going to have some loyalty to one another. You're going to have to learn to believe in something instead of denialism or direct comforts, and you're going to have a reconciliation between your Mountain West variant experience, and you're going to have that between the coast. And in the Mount West, they are rugged people who are individualistic, who want to be respected, and a reconciliation between that. Who knows if it looks like multiple nations? I know there's a difference between the Northwest and the Southwest. That may make sense, and I'm not telling you how to do that, but as a meta region, you have the North, the West, and the South. And I would suggest to the people who are out West, and to our Canadian friends who watch this, by the way, BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, you guys should be part of that conversation too, because frankly, you have a lot in common. I think Vancouver has more in common, frankly, with Seattle than it does Calgary. And I think Calgary has a hell of a lot more in common with, let's say, Billings than it does, what would be happening in how should I put it? On their own coast. And obviously, none of you have anything in common with Quebec. But up here in Maine, we have a lot in common. So, in the same sort of way that we recognize that Ontario is a lot like Michigan, that New Brunswick's a lot like Maine, and Quebec is Quebec. But Quebec is a place that can fit in with us. Vermont is weird too. We're used to that. And you begin to understand that those are the lines on which America can kind of reform itself. And I think that that's a pathway eventually to peace and sustainability, where we can fight both ends. We can say to the colleges, look, and here's how this starts. This is very easy, which is happening during COVID. The first protest we should do is stop sending your kids to college. You parents who are paying for this, why are you sending them there to learn these things? It's not helping. Just stop it. Say that, if we're going to have free things be free, why don't you hit them where it hurts? Why don't you say colleges should be free too? And if everything's going to be free and we're going to have equal justice and equal rights, let's say it. Make them live their own ideology. That's what Alinsky says. And as far as DC, we've reached the point where they are not willing to enforce their laws except against their own enemies. And we are out here. We are a peaceful movement. We are nonviolent. We are going ahead and speaking, saying our loyalty is different. And I will give a challenge to my friends out West and my friends down South. And I will say, and especially for the people down South, because I know what you're going to pick, develop a new flag, develop a new banner to ride under. Change things a little bit so you can bring in some of the people you want, okay? You can pay homage to it. I know what you want to run with. I know it already. Do that. And for the people out West, do the same thing. Start the conversation. And we can sit at the table, and maybe we be a confederation, Maybe we'll be the Prussia, The South will be Austria, and the West will be the Rhineland. Who knows? But we can figure out a way to do this, and that is the way that you have to start thinking about the problem. And look, I don't think we could save everywhere. We have our issues in the Atlantic, too. Don't think that the Mid-Atlantic, New England, and the Great Lakes are all one and the same. We're not, and I understand those differences. I lived in Pennsylvania for 10 years. I know the Mid-Atlantic. I was born in Milwaukee. My whole family's from Wisconsin on my dad's side, and I live up here in northern New England as the face of, Atlantic nationalism. But we are trying to do something because there are compatible and incompatible nations, and understanding that. Texas may be separate from the South and West. That's a choice for the Texans to make, and it's a choice for all of us to make. But if we understand our broad strokes, we can do these things. And for the people who've been in other regions of the country, I am telling you from the heart of empire, you guys need to be ready to do things also. We can give you the lessons and the leadership, but are you ready to have a homeland? And I want you to understand that. Are you ready to go ahead and be a Pacific citizen? Are you ready to be with Dixie once again? And is it something that works for all your people? This is the hard part. There are people who have been grafted onto you who do not necessarily belong there. I get that. When you have refugees that get dumped there for no other reason than change your society, that's different. But if there are people who've been there for 200, 300, 400 years or something, you have to reconcile. The West has to reconcile with the Latinos. The South has to reconcile with the blacks. The North has to reconcile with the natives. We have things we all have to deal with, and those are fine. And coming to a logical and smart reconciliation is the pathway to peace, success, and prosperity, and then control your immigration. And I will tell you, the one thing that we all need to get rid of is this idea that we bring people in because they're more recruits for the cause or they're more meat for the industrial grinder. Love your people, support your people, build your people, and only bring in people who want to be like your people. And that's as true if you're living down there in South Carolina and the coast of Fort Sumter as it is if you're living in Nova Scotia over by, in the shadow of Louisbourg, the first French fort that was in North America. So all of these things remain true, and it's just true out West as well. You guys will have to think more carefully because you have land that you're still filling. Who are you? What are you about? Ask those questions. We had to do that 150 years into our experience. New England was founded in 1620. I think Virginia is 1619. So we both kind of got an early start. The West came later. Let's call it Lewis and Clark, 1803. You're 200 years in. This is the time where we talk about renewal and reconsiderations. And that's what I think everyone needs to be doing as a conversation now. And as we do that, we can come to the table together. And look, I'm coming here as the voice of New England. We are going ahead and looking at how we can do things that are smarter for our region, because the world is not what we want to own. We just want our lives back. We don't want to be fighting wars over empires. We don't need to be filthy, stinking rich. I live in a small town modestly, and I've never been happier in my life. I'm not chasing the big corporate strategy. I don't want more stuff. I don't want to go to the future. And I want you to understand how important this is, because you don't necessarily know this. The fight we're going to have as the human race going forward, is against technology that will dominate every aspect of our lives, and a battle for enjoyment versus efficiency. This is really coming, because the AI future you imagine, where you get to enjoy everything you want and you can do 30 different things at once, do you not see how you're becoming a node in a network? You know, the far left people call this the collective. That's what they want. The people who are the neoliberals call this, what's the word for it? Transhumanism. They believe they're going to be uploaded as gods into machines. But the truth is, the machine is a fourth entity in this whole scenario that wants to say, hey, we are just going to control humanity and use it the way you would have used us. And do you feel bad about when you use a toaster or an oven or a microwave? In the same sort of way, you will see us be used in the future by distributed AI and super intelligence that are being created that are so foreign to the way we think, it will just see us as nodes in the system and human drones. So as you look at where we're going forward, and you look at the promise that, hey, we have a vaccination with nanochips that are going to go forward, and we're going to go ahead and they'll be able to watch us and track us and control us, now is the time for us to fight for human sovereignty. And it is not later. You will not have the choice 5 years from now. I am giving you the happy upside of this version, but there's a dark dystopic future that's just waiting for you that your own fears will enable. And I'm not saying don't be safe, by the way. I ran Coronavirus Central. I wear a mask when I go to positions because I don't know what the end game of this is. I suspect it isn't good. It doesn't really matter what you think exactly in terms of that, other than how far you're willing to go to protect yourself. But you need to recognize that not only are we fighting against this idea that we're going to be fighting against bad political ideologies. This is the first step. You just scratch the surface of the onion. Beneath that, you get to the idea that there are these transhumanist technologies that are going to go ahead and put us into the Skynet future. Remember, this is 2020. You get to have every 80s disaster movie at once. But at the end of the day, beneath Red Dawn, beneath, Terminator, you're ultimately fighting the old book in the first battle, good versus evil. You don't think that technology is just a disinterested force, do you? The voice in the machine, Deus Ex Machina. What's happening is that you are seeing the reinsertion of the demonic into the world. And I will tell you, if you start researching CERN, you start researching portals, and you're willing to have an open mind and understand, just because you don't see things, that doesn't mean they're not there, that ultimately there's a lot more going on to the story than you can absolutely understand. But for you to understand that, you need to be a human being, you need to be a spirit-filled being, and you need to have eyes to see and ears to listen. I can do what I can to awaken you to these struggles. That's my ministry and that's my job. I fight on every level I know how to fight on, and there are ones I miss. I am certainly an unequal and unworthy servant, but I do the best I can to go ahead and share that with you. So if you want to go ahead and be able to stand against that, because the rest of the world, by the way, outside of America, whatever our differences, by and large, will sell out without any choice. They run around in Sweden with chips, and China won't have a choice. Perhaps the breakdown to a new dark age may actually be of benefit to us, but I think we're already too far gone and that this is all being engineered. So what's needed now is for humanity to take a major step forward and eventually have no delusion about this. This is going to end up being a fight, and it's going to be kinetic, and it's going to be ugly, and there's going to be a lot of death involved. So you better make sure it's worthwhile for you when you're ready to do it, because it's coming to you, and you can hide from it for a while, maybe, and you can choose not to be involved in it. That's your choice. But you ultimately need to know what this is all about. And so when I lay all these foundations down in terms of what we're doing in the Atlantic, I do what New England does best when we're good. We teach, we educate, we learn, we share, and we correspond with one another. And I'm corresponding to my brothers out there in Oregon and Washington and Texas and Mississippi and Alabama, and I'm letting you know what we're thinking up here. And I invite you to do so. If you're within the Atlantic nation, make it real and talk about it. If you're without the Atlantic nation, then start talking about your nation and let's correspond to one another. I very much would like to see that happen. And if I've drawn the lines wrong, then tell me why and draw them yourselves. But understand that DC is not your friend. New York Fed is not your friend. Hollywood movies not your friend. And none of these people are looking out for your interest, either individually or collectively. They're going to take away procreation from you next. I'm sure that's what's coming down the line. They're already attacking the historical faiths, and they attack your identity because they don't want you to have any efficacy and sovereignty. And I want you to be sovereign. I believe the individual is sovereign. That was what God gave us as a gift. That's what grace requires. That I believe the community is sovereign. That's loyalty. That's a value we have. I believe we owe something to our lands to make good use of them. That's why I believe in nature. And I believe that if I keep talking long enough, it'll get in some people's heads, and that reason is not a wasted effort in me wasting my limited energy, because I'm an old guy that doesn't have a lot of energy, and I'm blowing the last of it. I'm trying to make this work. If it doesn't, I'm going into seclusion, and you won't have to worry about Tom Kaczynski telling you anything going forward. And I will do the best I can to survive and take care of my poor sick wife. By the way, I want to thank everyone who's been saying prayers for Dana's health. Her health has been very poor, and my wife sadly may be losing the ability to walk. We need to get and desperately see a neurologist, and we are told in the medical system up here that we will have to wait 3 months just to get the test. It is a total failure. It is an abortion of a system, and yet people say it's a great system. It's not a great system. It's a human tragedy, and how much suffering we enable by the fact of how we allocate our resources is absolutely crazy, and something we need to reconsider in loyalty and commitment to one another. Just because someone's quiet doesn't mean they're not angry, and just because their cause isn't the popular one doesn't mean it's not an important one. For all the sick people out there suffering with diseases that are only considered worthy of treatment and management, and no one even cares about cures because we're busy investing more of our money into other things, I think that we owe all of us ourselves better, because sooner or later it will be you in that spot watching someone you love suffer and potentially even moving toward death. And hopefully a miracle will happen. We pray for that. But the miracle may be her returning to heaven, and unshackling me to do things that must be done. My wife doesn't deserve those things. You guys had some questions. I will take a little bit of time and answer them as a kindness, and I will be back on Friday. But if you have any questions you want to put out there, hopefully you've enjoyed the broadcast. I always like to answer questions, so we'll do that if I can manage to foolishly somehow work my way up here. Let's see. So Zach wrote, sorry, change the topic. Let's see. Where do I see the future of America heading regarding China if Biden wins the election? So I think if Biden wins the election, that you will see a right-wing revolt in America, that will put what the left has been doing to shame, and I will explain why I think that. Because I have to answer with that answer before I can even have the chance of that. The left has acted in very, very bad faith. There were a lot of people who were very unhappy when Barack Obama got elected. Monstrously unhappy. And when you look at the people he held around with, like Bill Ayers, you know why. And they largely, although there were complaints, but they sucked it up for the good of the nation. They said, we're going to do our job. Things were won fair and square, and we're going to deal with it. The left did not do that. They were running around with those ridiculous pussy hats about 5 seconds later, causing every scam, every impeachment thing. And the right learned the lesson that we would never be allowed to govern this country again. And that has been the case for 3.5 years. Donald Trump, as much as he's presented as the Cheeto and the fascist, in truth is a moderate 1980s Democrat. That's the truth of it. I mean, look at him. He supported bump stocks. He wants infrastructure spending. He's allowing DACA. He basically betrayed the base he spoke to rhetorically, and he's actually been a very moderate leader, believe it or not. Don't let the media fool you. So the right has decided, if you won't even allow us to have moderation, that you're going to force this on us, be like, okay, if you're going to give us that, we're going to make the country ungovernable. And that's what the right thinks. And I know, because I've had the conversations. And what will be the spark that sets it off, I have no idea. But that's where we're at. And I have no delusion that if Trump were to win, that the left would do the same thing to the country. So the idea of what a theoretical Biden administration looks like, I mean, Biden would probably be a continuation if he had his options. Let's put it differently. The people who are around Biden are going to be like the people who were around Obama, who are going to be accommodating. They're probably going to try to resurrect the Iran deal. Israel would probably get into a war with Iran the moment that Biden wins while Trump is still in office, to make that not happen, because they're worried about that. That's a problem that you'd run into. And China, for what it's worth, would continue its Belt and Road Initiative. And I think they would make the bet that Biden would not defend Taiwan, and they might make a move on it. And as far as what Biden would do, Biden would probably put a lot of energy in trying to rebuild the relationships in Europe. But I think fundamentally he'd be pushed aside very quickly by whoever his VP is going to be. The rumor is Kamala Harris, and that you would see the efforts to go ahead and realize the victory of the Bolshevik Revolution, which is what it would quickly become here in the United States. I think that what you would see in a Biden election is that he would quickly be pushed aside. You would see new leadership that was not elected, or that was pushed in through the back door as the vice president, as acting much in the way that Hitler did when he became chancellor in 33. You know, the conservatives thought they had control on him. Von Papen and Hindenburg and all those people thought they had it. And what ended up happening was that he, because he had a sense and will of things, played the political game. And when he played the political game, he knew the minute he got to power, he was going to consolidate it. The far left understands the nature of power. I give him credit for this, by the way. The right is clueless in how to wield power. Always has been, because they have a misapprehension of human nature in the time in which they live, and they're not willing to reconsider it, because to do so would require them to have discord, and they're not willing to have the unpleasant conversations that are required where you're going to tell people to do things differently. So I think that if you in fact had that happen, you would have things descend very quickly. Now I do think that there is a very high probability, I don't want to say it's a majority possibility, but I think the idea that we might go to war with China before the election comes is very realistic. I think it's probably the most likely way by which Trump saves his presidency. I think the media would start giving him a free pass on a heck of a lot of things, and ultimately they would be happy, because at the end of the day, when you look at the people who are really, really high up in the game, they think there are too many people, and the best way to get rid of them is war, famine, plague. So if you're willing to start big wars, they allow you the option to service their servants, but what they do is they shut you down if you speak against that. So when you see programs like Free Atlantic Radio being marginalized, why does that happen? Well, it's because we're presenting alternatives that actually have value to people, and that's why, you know, I do this, so that you have a better understanding that you could do things a different way. And it's really not that hard to think of, and it would be a lot happier, but you don't do it because you have to, here's the trade-off you always have to make. To have a new system, you have to be willing to abandon your place in the old system. And the truth is, most people are pretty comfy, and they understand on some core level that something awful is going to come when the thing breaks down. And so what we have is an Indian summer where we look to the sky and we see the snow clouds in the horizon, but we go out in the lake one more day because we're like, not today, not today, not today. But eventually, if you wait too long, you risk being frozen out when that happens. And so that's the challenge that you have to deal with when you're looking at things. And I will say the window in which we can actually offer an alternative that will be successful, I personally believe, is no greater than 6 months. I believe that if things continue unchecked, one of two outcomes will happen. Either Trump will get us into a world war that will go ahead and make a lot of people who are very powerful happy, but go ahead and build a new global authoritarianism at the end of it that will monitor everything. That's the UN outcome. Or the far left will go ahead and win, and they'll get what they want and eventually get their revolution, and maybe you get communism in America to take down this country while world authoritarianism goes forward, and eventually we are liberated from them or included into them in a sort of eventual Chinese sort of world future outcome that's no better. And if you want to have something different than that, then you're going to have to make a lot of big actions to do it, because the problem that we're ultimately paying for is for decades, and I would even argue potentially centuries of inaction about standing up against the cultural degradation of our country. And this stuff, you know, we could trace it. I wrote a book, someone has to say it, The Hidden History of How America Was Lost, that gave you just the thinnest, barest outline of what you're looking at. I mean, I could probably write 900 pages on the topic if I had the time, but unfortunately, writing isn't the medium of the age, which is sad, because frankly, I make a lot more money writing than I do doing this. But there isn't time for me to worry about money. I have to get the message out how people can hear it, and we only have a few months during which I can kind of bring you up to speed with where my mind's at, and that's why I do these broadcasts. Anyway, so those are some of the pieces that are out there. But if you have any other questions, get them in right now, and we'll fill them out, and then I'll be back on Friday evening. I'll probably record, if everything goes according to plan, my show for Friday on Thursday. I don't really know what I'm going to cover for it, to be honest with you. I want to talk perhaps maybe about this idea of Atlantic maybe a little more, because I think I could have done a better job of that. And I want to talk about what it is that makes an area northeastern, and why I work in this area, by the way. All right, great question. Let's see. How would you recommend persuading fellow whites who are more currently independent or left-leaning toward our vision, and also about the real dangers that we are in and lay ahead? So the great thing about the New Albion sort of Atlanticist vision that I am putting out there, I shouldn't call it Atlanticist, because that means something. We'll call it Atlantican. We'll change it here, because we are kin. Isn't that better? You guys like that? I could call it New Albioner, but I don't, that doesn't work for this. So we'll call it Atlantican. The thing about Atlantican culture is that it's not left or right wing. We actually seek a reconciliation between men and women, between left and right. And for people in cities who have a more left leaning bent, we are going to give you the ability to do what you want. You don't think our civilization is just? Okay, prove it. We are setting up a system where you can work in your towns. You'll have fully a quarter of the income, which you can rise up as high as you want. If you wanted to live in a communist experience where you literally pay 100% tax rate and you can go ahead and convince your town to do it, let's say you have 500 people in upstate New York maybe who decide they want to try that, then our system theoretically allows you to do that, provided you can persuade a majority of the people who are there to do it. And I would imagine if you set the tax rate that high of your sales tax, literally people would leave who didn't want to be a part of it, and you could realize your effort at a commune, and you could go ahead and have whatever rules you want, provided the basic liberties that we enumerated in the New Albion Atlantic Charter would work. And that would be something that could work. And for the left and right, what I suspect you would have, and this is, I'm not sure about this, but I think this is right, that you would have a couple small idiosyncratic far left and far right variations. I'm sure there'd be a little gnat-soaked town up in rural Maine, up in Aroostook County or something. And that's fine. I mean, as long as you respect the basic rights. And I find that actually when people are allowed to do what they want and they feel that they have the opportunity to explore their ideas, even the nastiest of people can be quite congenial. I mean, you should believe the people I've seen sit at tables together, and they can actually be quite nice when they're not being political hacks for the public. And the public becomes a cheering section. This is one of the problems why left and right don't get along. Twitter's the perfect example of this, where you have this gladiator woke culture where people who are actually very polite and pleasant act like complete jerks in person, or when they see other people watching them, because they don't want to be seen as being soft on whatever their issue is. And you can't do that way. So if you sit at the table and you allow local solutions, you can have those sort of answers where you get past the left-right paradigm. And for white people specifically, I will say this. The one thing about Atlantic culture, and I think this should be true in Pacific and Dixie culture as well, but in Atlantic culture explicitly, since I am the one leading this, your king and monarch, sovereign, King Thomas I, long may he reign, right? That ultimately our idea is we want white people to be welcome. I live in a state that's 94% white. Our region in aggregate is 79% white. European culture is the foundation of our ideas, along with the idea of Christian belief, and that we would work to put those things together in a way where, are we trying to be exclusively white? No, we're not doing that. Are people who are non-white welcome? Sure, within the limits of those who are integrated. Now, in the future, would we bring in more people who weren't there, who were non-white? It depends if they fit. And the truth is, most people who are going to fit into what we're trying to do probably are going to be white. I do think that there will be a greater black influence on Dixie culture and a greater Latino influence on Western culture. Why? Because Mexico's in the West, and because there were a lot of blacks brought into the South. These are natural, organic developments, and I think that that's fine. And for those who are here who question it, that's fine. We can work with you. And the question becomes one of culture, the ideas that link us. Now, are there some ideas that I think are anathema? Yeah, I'm not a fan of Islam, and I'm not going to hide it. Do I believe in the right of freedom of speech and freedom of religion? Sure, I do. But ultimately, I'm not going to allow money to be sent from Saudi Arabia to pay for mosques here, no more than I would allow money to go in from the Vatican to go ahead and pay for Catholic churches. If religion exists in the Atlantic area, it's going to exist as an organic development of the people who live here, not as an externally paid function. I suspect when that happens, you will find a lot of the things that people find most objectionable will disappear, because that is a form of cultural imperialism that really does happen, exists, and is pushed very cleverly by people who understand that. So when I put this idea out there, what am I promising white folk? Because no one speaks to whites. I will speak to whites. The Atlantic nation is the end of the anti-white crusade. We honor your history because it is our history. We cannot exist absent white history, and white history is one that's successful. But ultimately, we are not trying to be the white state. What we are trying to be is the Atlantic nation, and we are trying to be our own homeland that will be heavily influenced, honoring of, and respect that identity. If you are a white person who wants to be not forced to have freedom of association, we are not seeking to force that on you or have you force that on anyone else. We are not seeking to have fights over it, and we ask that you treat everyone with dignity and respect and receive that in return. I, as someone who's been heavily involved with the identity movement for a very long time, understand that at heart, beyond the provocateurs, which are usually ADL guys sitting there, most white people just want to be respected and be left alone to do their own thing. honestly, America wouldn't be the way it was if white people were as awful as we were presented as being. The truth is, most white people are just that way. And whatever choices people make for themselves, that is their own choice. And that's the one that we should honor, I think. And I think it's true for other groups. And if at the end of the day, I will say this, if at the end of the day, other minority groups decide in aggregate they really want to have their own thing and be separate, I am perfectly fine with the idea of a reconciliation where a certain amount of land is given over and that they can go exist in some form of confederation where they can have that. Now, we might fight over what that land is and people would be unhappy about the moving, but I'm okay with that solution if that's what's required for people to find a pathway to peace. I think that's fair. You guys have to tell me what you think. But hopefully that'll be an answer. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything of that. How can we convince them about the real dangers that lie ahead? I mean, look at what's already happening. I mean, if you're a white person, okay, if you're a white person, you want to know what happens when the Bolsheviks take over because they listen to this common cancel culture, you need to get woke on what's happening in South Africa. You know, Nelson Mandela is painted as a hero. The guy was a communist and he was a murderer. And the fact that his ANC and all the groups that have followed them, you go look at what necklacing is, where you wrap a flaming tire around someone's head and roll them down a hill that his wife, Winnie Mandela, came up with. That's what South Africa really was. It was the destruction of a first world nation into a third world shithole. And I will tell you something also you should be aware of. The people who pushed this, by and large, were not blacks. I mean, there were some black people involved with it, and there were some faces that were given leadership, but they were not the ones who actually pushed this. In the same way that Black Lives Matter is not overwhelmingly a black organization, okay? You need to understand who's pushing it. It's global elites who find certain people out there to speak for them, and it's the big financiers. And if a lot of them have belonged to a certain tribe, then they need to be held to account for their actions individually, and that someone needs to go ahead and say those things, but you're not allowed to ask those questions. And I'm not looking to go ahead and start a pogrom here, but you need to realize that that's the reality. And for my black brothers and sisters who are out there, look who you aren't allowed to criticize. You're going to need to go ahead and be aware of what's happening out there. So that is my suggestion to you, and hold people to account. I don't think you can hold whole groups to account for anything, but I do think you need to recognize groups have tendencies, and groups will defend and apologize for their own. And one of the hardest things is you need to be able to call out your own. I'll call out whites who are acting like idiots. I'll call blacks who are acting like idiots. I'll call anyone who's acting like an idiot because they're acting like an idiot. And you have the right, and this is an important key point, not only the right, you have the responsibility to criticize people who are acting like morons. If you don't do it, no one else will. And so many of the terrible things we deal with today are directly a consequence of the fact that people lack the gumption and courage to go out there and say this. You're wrong. I did it. I say it. I get in a lot of trouble for it, but you know what? It's the only way to survive, because otherwise you have forfeited reason. And absent reason, what do you live in? Fantasyland. Do you want to live in Fantasyland? I don't. It's an ugly place where you have a whole bunch of people dressed really badly. And I think you all know what I mean by that. If you've ever seen a gay pride parade, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The plague hasn't worked. Keenan does some good stuff. Good to see you here, Matt. I'll just say hi to the people here. Greg, glad you're here with us this morning here. Some people think being too public like this is a bad thing. Agree? Yes, or why not? It is a bad thing if you're worried about being tormented in your life. Yeah, I mean, look, Dana and I get attacked all the time. But ultimately, if no one ever speaks up, nothing's going to change. And I am doing my part. I'm doing more than my part. But I will say this to your friends. If they don't want to speak up, that when the time comes, I expect they better show up. Because if you don't want to speak and you don't want to act, and there's just one word for you, you're a freaking coward, man. You're either a coward or a moron, and either way, you need to get out of the way. And let's be clear about one other thing, too. People don't want to hear this, but this is the reality of it. Mass movements are not what's going to decide history other than followers on latching on. A few people with big ideas, a lot of will, and a lot of courage are going to decide things. It is an act of faith and an act of will upon which history is built. And that we are reaching the time where people are going to go ahead and we are going to have to take terrible chances in order to realize major victories or terrible defeats. If we succeed, a free nation awaits in an Atlantic homeland. If we fail, death by the gallows. And that's what will end up happening. And whether it happens very quickly because we go out there and we argue a fight, or whether it happens slowly where we wait and watch our whole future be degraded and we get demoralized to the point where we give up and watch Big Brother take over, or whether it's something in between where they come in the night for us, after, Kamala Harris is in charge, we end up in the same place if we do not succeed, because we live in a country, in a world really, where we are not wanted. And if you believe these ideas, I mean, let's be honest, if you're sitting sitting in this chat, unless you're getting paid to do so by some, subversive entity, you're here because you understand that things are not working well enough, and that you have to pick if you're going to have this fight or if you're going to kick the can down the road. We had 2 or 3 different generations kick the can down the road, and here we are now having to consider and contemplate these things. And so, in a lot of ways, it's terrible. The risks are worse because when this happened the first time with the American Revolution, people met quietly in coffee houses, and they met in taverns and in churches, and they had these conversations. But that's not the way the world works. We don't gather there. We gather in places that are owned by people who hate us, who will use against us. And so I'm forced to take terrible risks and talk about ideas like this in the nicest, most genteel ways to awaken you to what the actual consequences of action and inaction are. And these channels will eventually be taken away from us. There's no doubt of that. But someone asked a good question. Let me see who it was. That talk about what exactly we can expect if we dox ourselves. It's a great question. What you can expect is that your friends will betray you, that your workplace, if you don't already know, you really know, not just hear them say it, you may lose your job. You will be presented as a pariah. You will have slurs put against you. And if you are married or have kids, you will have tremendous economic and financial and personal stress put on your relationship. And understand that once you're doxxed, if you continue speaking, or if they just don't like you, or if you get their wrath, they do not just dox you and then you're done. They keep coming after you. You will be called names. I got fired from my job for speaking out 2+ years ago. They don't stop. I get hit pieces written about me in the New York Times. And you know what? Keep them coming. Go ahead. I'll make me famous. I'll smile with my one tooth all day long if you do that, because I have accepted I'm in it for the fight. I'm in it for the Lord, actually. I'm in it to reclaim the spiritual nature of this, and I accept the persecution. I am blessed that I'm one of the few people in America who gets paid to tell the truth. And you guys who buy my books and you send a little money along to Venmo, CVC, PRV, you let me do that. If you're not willing to do it yourself, then pay for me to do it. I'll go ahead and do that. That's fine. And I'm happy to do that for you. I'm good at it at this point, and I've gone ahead and I've taken a lot of bullets deliberately to protect good people who can't take the risks I can. Because understand this, they will use your family against you. They will attack your wife or your husband. There is no too low, because ultimately they do not believe in humanity. They don't believe that people have value. They believe the system has value, and if you are a syntax error, they will delete you. If you are an aberration, they will remove you. And they don't want to kill you usually, although it does happen if you're bad enough. What they want to do is they want to marginalize you, or they want to go ahead and propagandize you. I get to stick around doing things because I'm painted as a boogeyman that's useful, and they're stuck under their own branding of me. But ultimately, what they can do is a lot of different ways they can destroy your ability to continue. And these are things that will happen to you. And it's understood that they're pushing us into, we're like a spring. We're being compressed tighter and tighter and tighter. But the good news is that all the kinetic energy, all those things that you sucked up, okay, that potential energy is just waiting like this to come across. And we will eventually do that. And it will happen. It's just a matter of, you got one shot at it. We have the silver bullet. We have the right ideas. We actually have the right of the moral issue too. But the moment has to be perfect. And the moment isn't there yet, because I hate to tell you, things have to get worse because people are willing to accept their degradation. And there needs to be enough. And it's not everyone. It's not 20%. It's not 10%. It's not even 5%. Maybe it's 3%. Maybe it's 1%. Maybe it's 0.1%. Give me 10,000 heroes and I'll give you a new Olympus, that's where we're at. But that's what's needed, and that's what you can do. And if you have to decide if that's who you are, and be honest with yourself. If you're not, that's fine. You can support those sorts of things without being a part of it. And it's going out in front of it. I try very, very hard to give you a context and a construct you can support that is not really racial. It's rooted in support for our heritage. It's rooted in respect for all people. It's rooted in a set of ideas that allow you to express what you want, whether you're left wing or right wing. And we've worked really hard. And when I say we, I've done most of the work. But my ideas stand on all the people I've read, who I can't even recount, but there were a lot of them, and people who've worked with me for years on New Albion and those sort of things. Those sort of things are out there. And I will say, if you think you are going to be allowed dissent. And it doesn't have to be identity. You could be white, you could be hetero, you could be Christian, you could be whatever. You could be a lesbian who doesn't want to get fucked by a tranny. Sorry to say this. And you will be attacked by these people because ultimately the idea that you have the choice, the sovereignty to decide, and forgive my language, but that's literally, I had a conversation like that where there was a woman, a young woman who was mad about this. She was attacked for asserting this. And she was like, can't we get back to the good old days? I'm like, sister, you don't even know what you're talking about. But I laughed because it was a real moment. It was a moment of bonding because you're not going to be allowed the new normal. And that's what this is about. What you are going to be done, get over and over again. And I'll give you a prediction for the next few years either way. We are going to get a series of traumas that are designed to degrade our ability to resist and to force us into a world where we are subjects and serfs and slaves. And whether we're nodes in a machine or, whether we are serving our masters better, however it all works out, I guarantee you it's not a future you really want to be a part of. So I don't know exactly how it works. None of us do. We watch all of it. I thought when COVID came out, it was potentially an organic thing. It was maybe something that escaped. I didn't know. And I maybe overreacted to some of that. Not in terms of what it was. I knew it was big. I just didn't know how big and I didn't know the right piece. But now I'm seeking the guilty. So when we go about that, some of us speak the truth because some of us have no choice. I cannot help being the way I am. And I'm used to paying the cost, but I'm tired. I mean, I've said this at my shows. I'm pretty beat up. But I got enough energy in for me for one fight. I've gotten to the point where the rallying cry of the old man. You'll never realize this as you get older. It really is true though. Is you decide, all right, I got one more hill to climb before I go, and I leave and I put my flag there and I say to the kids, don't screw it up. And that's kind of how I look at it. I'm 39, but I feel 59. This beard, if you saw pictures, I did it on the live stream once on the evening show. If you look at my beard, if you were to see it now, what I looked like just 5 years ago, I looked literally 20 years younger, and I've earned every wrinkle and every scar. But I didn't back down. I paid the price, and not just this. I mean, the health situation in my family. I've talked about that. Really, we need a living caregiver, but that's a whole nother story. I mean, it's just it's a funny thing. The Lord always teaches you humility. I'm really good at doing this political stuff, and I'm really bad at being a caregiver, and yet the Lord wants me to be good at things another way. Maybe He's trying to remind me that it's my job to care for people as much as it is to try to convert them. And I always take a lesson with a thankful heart if I can, because I mean, at least in the morning, I'm a nicer person in the morning than the evening. By the evening, I get cranky because I like to sleep, and my wife's an insomniac. But yeah, I like to get up early and I like to get a good start. So, and that's okay. It's not her fault. She wants to sleep too. Let's see who else we got here. I'm going to go through the last questions. We'll do a quick little prayer. And if you got anything, get it in now, and I will go forward. Hey, good to see you, Vicky. Arian, glad you're here. Grand Flash, hope all's well out there in Nevada, man. You know what? And we're going to do a whole show on this. I'm going to do a show. I'll time it where it's better for the West Coast people, and we're going to talk about the West one day, because a lot of people ask me to talk about it. I can talk about the Atlantic, but I'm going to help you guys. Would I keep Hollywood Casino in Bangor? How about Encore in Boston? People have the right to have casinos, I think. I don't think they're particularly smart. That, I guess, would be a decision for the town, the community, and the state. I haven't really thought about it a lot. I don't necessarily have a problem with stupidity. I don't think it's very brilliant, but I don't think you should be prohibited from doing things against your interest. So I don't have necessarily a big issue with that, although where the money went to might change a little bit. South Africa is horrifying, Cassandra. I'm glad you recognize that. 7:30 a.m. I've been up since 5 a.m., man. You guys need to start early. Early to bed, early to rise. That's what you got to do. Think like a farmer, right? The political pressure for August 1st about Kamala's VP pick was quite odd. She's got an interesting backstory. Supposedly, she slept her way to the top through Willie Brown, and I'm not telling you something you ain't going to learn from other sources. I'm just going to give you a hint. That's the way it really was. You were fired after 17 years due to the virus. Tasmania is virtually... I am going to care for dinner. Sometime it would be best if you read your books on YouTube. I'd pay. Well, if you want to read my books, let me tell you something. I don't mention this enough. On Audible, you can find Someone Has to Say It, The Coming Civil War, End the Con, and I believe I had after Trump read. I also have someone who's working to read the copy of, what do we got here? New Albion. So if you really do want to listen to my writings, Jeff Winston did an amazing job recovering those, and you would have the opportunity to listen to them. So if you want to hear my books, my voice is already worn out. I couldn't do it, but I am having them put out there, and 4 of my books are available on Audible. So if you like that, that's there. And if you like listening to me between the podcasts, the videos, I mean, and for those of you who don't know who are on YouTube, you should know, but if you don't, if you were to go on Apple iTunes or Google Play, I do put out an hour podcast on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I also answer your questions at depth, which any of you are welcome to send as well. And I simulcast it here on YouTube, to New Albion at protonmail.com. I answer your questions at depth that are out there. And I try to get to all of them. And sometimes you ask really deep, probing questions. I don't know the answer to everything, but I'm willing to offer thoughts with the understanding that this is something we'll have to collaboratively work on going forward. And it will be, and at least I hope it's that some people will have some ideas beyond me about how to do things. I mean, I'm a smart guy, but don't make me do all the work, all right? What else we got here? A broken down 67-year-old rebel. Oh, don't kid yourself. If you're still out here, we can use you, Brian. Don't worry about that. Let's see. Appreciate the work. Thank you, Cassandra. I thank you. Brian's been up early. Maybe it's time to find a new family. You know, you really need to find, one of the things I will say this, the single thing that stops me from going public is my own family's disagreement with my politics. It's bad families have discord, man. It's hard. And, we're going to a situation where it's going to be brother versus brother. But don't, let me make a cautious comment. And this is based on a lot of years of experience in politics. Don't trust your family to be those who share politics with you, because the minute you disagree, you'll end up very alone. Build a cultural foundation, truths you agree upon, a faith you share. Build some glue between you so that when you're fighting for something, you're fighting together, and don't let the political thing be what you lead with. If you do, you're going to lose. I'm just telling you. That's why this is a cultural fight. This is a spiritual revolution. We're fighting the religion of rote with the religion of truth. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, we pray that in this time of discord and discomfort, that you stand with us, that you offer guidance and leadership, and you lead us to the truth that you gave us in this world you created, and the chance for us as humans, as divinely created beings, a creation of a loving Father, to find their way to be successful and to support one another, and that we may draw those connections between one another. So whether we exit in peace or whether we must fight for these things, that you give us the strength and courage of lions, where we are honoring our pack, where we are supportive of one another, and that we are ferocious and brave and fearless, but that we also have kindness towards those who we love, and that we have mercy as your Son instructed, that we find the balance in these difficult times, and that we don't lose our humanity like so many around us do, that Jesus serve as an example to lead us, we take the lesson that which he gave us and have it has meaning. And I hope that for those who are listening, who wonder why I say this, that the heart is open, and that you understand that ultimately we are fighting for what we believe, and nothing is higher than our highest beliefs, and that's what will unite us. In Jesus' name, I pray we come together as brothers and sisters. Amen. A lot of us who were in the identity movement for a long time realized it wasn't good enough to fight for racist religion. I know a lot of people look at it differently than that. You're going to need something bigger. I'd say fight for God, and he'll fight for you. Hope all is out there in Minnesota. The eastern, your guys are in the western march of New Albion. Glad to have you here. And I want to hear from more Great Lakes people, by the way. Send me some messages. Let me know what's happening out there. I need information. I talk to you. If you want me to tell you interesting stories, you guys share a little bit. Give me a little something to work with. Create some ideas. We get some fun visuals going out. I want to give some thanks to my friend Trevor, who's working on that. Not going to give more information on that. Don't want to get him in trouble. He's a good dude, working very hard. I will be back. What do I have to do? I was going to travel today, but the wife needed me to stick around. So I will be back on Wednesday, Friday. You'll see me then. I'll have a good morning show for you. Send comments, leave questions, all those things. God bless each and every one of you. Have a good day.